I had this opportunity right before this to intern at Caltech, and Caltech is a university that runs JPL. And when I got done, it was this chance that I got to actually hang out with scientists, and I was working with an artist who was working with scientists there. And I thought that I was going to go into branding after school, but I wanted to work at a research center. And I had this opportunity to meet the director of the Jet Propulsion Lab, but I only had 2 seconds to sell myself. And so I had this opportunity, and I said, wouldn't it be cool to have artists involved in brainstorming future missions? And he said, oh, that sounds wonderful. He's an excitable kind of guy. And then he literally turned around and walked away. And and I was like, oh, how am I going to get a hold of this guy? Because he's hard to get a hold of. And so I'd been sending my resume not in an envelope, but in a letter, in like a next day air, like FedEx type of thing. Because it's human nature. If you get one of those, you have to open it, right? So I was going on a trip. My wife was around. She went to the store. They didn't have the normal size envelopes. They only had these gigantic envelopes. And so she put it in there, just this little letter, and so he got this giant envelope. And he didn't exactly know what to do with it, and so he kind of sent it on to some people, and they brought me in, and they thought, oh, you went to art school, you must know how to do animation or something like that. Maybe you could help us with that. And I was like, I'll do anything to work at a place like this, but you know this bottle project, like this is what I'm passionate about. And and he kind of looked at it, and he didn't quite know what to make of it, and he said, well, I don't really understand what it is that you do, but I'll give you 6 months, and we'll see what happens. And so now it's been about 14 years, and it's been an amazing time. The first 8 years, I was really by myself, but the past 6 or so years, I've been able to build a team, and there are people from lots of different backgrounds, but sort of in the creative arts sort of worlds. And we talk about doing a couple different things. One is helping people think through their thinking, and the other is this idea of sneaking up on learning. And so starting out with the thinking through thinking, we have this room at JPL. It's called Left Field, and if you know about baseball, the idea is that you say the ideas came from left field, and so that means that it's sort of a crazy idea. And so it's this big room, and we're in there not so much to, we're not going to do any calculations, we're not going to, know the newest physics of the day, but we're there to ask questions that they wouldn't normally ask, and then also help them rearrange information in ways that hopefully give them a different and more deep understanding of the projects that they're actually working on. Recently, we just got done doing a workshop with a couple of astronauts and people in the wearable worlds right now, and coming up with future thoughts for how we could have wearable devices on a Martian spacesuit. So that's been a lot of fun. And then this whole other area that we call sneaking up on learning. And it's the idea of creating something beautiful and mysterious that sort of calls you. And hopefully when you get there, you start to ask questions and you're in the mindset for learning. So one of the very first projects that I worked on, they were telling me about finding planets around other stars. And at the time, they'd only found about 100 of them or something like that. And they were saying, we're trying to find planets around other stars, and we're really trying to find an Earth-like planet around another star. And to me, that sounded pretty Star Trek-y, but is it real? But then they give me all these big numbers to try to explain to me why it should be out there. And but I'm not very good at numbers, and so I had to sort of create an experience for me to understand what they were talking about. And so what you see here is a grain of sand. So this is a grain of sand. And what's cool about being at a place like JPL is you could take that to someone and say, can you drill a hole into a grain of sand? And they're like, great, that sounds like fun. So there's the hole. So we live in this place called the Milky Way galaxy. There are hundreds of billions of other galaxies out there, but we're in this one. So we live in this little tiny area, but it's also where we found about 3,000 other planets around other stars at this moment. Actually, it's about 3,500. And they're all within this little, or most of them are all within this little tiny area. And what's crazy is that our technology is so archaic that we can hardly see anything that's actually there. And we've already found that many. So we're going to find tens of thousands more planets in that little tiny area, let alone the rest of the galaxy. And then you need 6 rooms full of sand to show all the other galaxies that we know about. And so I would have all the sand, and then under a magnified glass, you kind of go over and you'd see that little tiny hole and kind of get a sense of scale. And some people would go, oh man, we are totally insignificant. But I hope that you look at it and go, wow, we are special. There's something special here. We are significant. There's a spacecraft that is at Jupiter right now. It's called Juno. And I've been working with the team for a long time. I worked with it back when it was just paper. They were proposing the idea. And it's been sending back these amazing images. I don't know if you've seen these recently, but my friend looked at a picture like this and he said, you know, it makes the red eye, and that's how we all define what Jupiter is. It makes all that look boring. I mean, look at these amazing, storms. And but before it got to Jupiter, it had to go out towards Mars and then come back and then get really, really close to the Earth and use the gravity of the Earth to slingshot it to Jupiter because we didn't have a big enough rocket to send us all the way there. And so this became, something we had to think about. Well, what are we going to do? It's going to come back towards the Earth. Can we somehow get people involved? Can we somehow get people to think about this and maybe communicate to it? And so we started to think about social media, but then we kind of went old school. We didn't use Twitter and that sort of thing. We went super old school, so it was ham radio. I don't know if any of you guys have had uncles or some past person that was interested in ham radio, Morse code, but this is the project, and get your tissues.
This is my transmitter. Maybe it's something you can use, I don't know.
Juno experiment is something that a group of us came up with.
The biggest challenge we had was we didn't know if this was going to work or not.
If it works, I'm part of history.
This is W6JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. Hello, CQ, CQ, CQ.
The Earth flyby is Juno's way of gaining some extra speed, changing direction so that its orbit can take it to Jupiter.
We said, what if we actually sent something to Juno? Basically came up with the idea that we could send Morse code to Juno, enlist the support of amateur radio operators around the world.
So the intent is to join amateur radio community together in a coordinated transmission from Earth to the Juno spacecraft as it flies by.
The website would tell them, okay, key down now, then key up, transmit for 30 seconds. And that's how we would send a DIT. Everybody knows Morse code is dit, 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 da, da. Well, it turns out to say hi to Juno, it takes 4 dits, then space, and then 2 dits for the I.
I thought, wow, that's a neat thing to do, and they're going to need a lot of people to pull this thing off. I said, I'm good to go.
We're getting ready right now. Here we go.
And now we are transmitting here.
They could hear ham radio operators all over the world doing this, which was really remarkable.
Everybody's doing this at the same time. Thousands and thousands of hams.
With any luck, the Juno spacecraft will be able to listen and hear all these amateur radio transmissions.
And so what we're doing now is we're looking at the data that's come down to see if we can put together that signal that says, hi.
Will it work? Who knows?
I have the audio from Juno. I'd love you to listen to it.
This sounds very cool.
And it actually worked and it heard us.
When you think about what it is, it was really, really amazing.
How many times do you get to say hi to a spacecraft that's made by your planet? To be a part of it, that was very great.
More than thinking about what it means to me, I think it's just such a great thing that humankind has the ability to think beyond our own environment. It's the curiosity, it's the adventuring spirit, I think, that the space program has given us.
Hi, Juno!
Hi, Juno.
Hi, Juno.
Hi, Juno.
Hi, Juno.
Hi, Juno. Goodbye. Thank you.
Okay, take 17.
So that was a lot of fun to be a part of, especially since it happened during one of our government shutdowns. So we actually weren't allowed to tell anybody about this. It was illegal to tweet or Facebook about it. Fortunately, it's a tight-knit community. I wanted them to say hello, but it wouldn't quite fit on a T-shirt, so it would have been too many letters. So being in the position I'm in, I get a bunch of weird emails every once in a while. I kind of have a little folder that says strange emails. And one day, I had given a talk a few days before, and someone wrote me up, and they said, Dan, there needs to be a museum of awe, and you should run it. And I was busy, and I was like, whatever, that's whatever. And I got stuff to do. And then he kept after me. He was like, Dan, there needs to be a museum of awe, and you need to run it. And sometimes I need to be hit over the head with a good idea. And I was like, oh, man, wouldn't it be cool to be the director of the Museum of Awe? But what does that mean? And so I called up my friend, David Delgado. We do lots of things together. And we had dinner one night, and he had this great idea. He was like, the Museum of Awe, that's really been around since the beginning of time. And the Museum of Awe, it's the oldest museum in existence because we live in the Museum of Awe, right? But we're too busy and we're jaded and we're looking at our phones and all this sort of stuff, and we don't get to actually see the Museum of Awe that often. I have kids, and at one point they're really small, and for a 3-year-old, like everything is the Museum of Awe, right? And like, oh, look at that. But somehow it all gets beaten out of us, and maybe the talk that was here before was about school, and maybe that's what happens is we kind of forget about the Museum of Awe. And so our job is to be able to help people reconnect with that in some way. And we were trying to think about, well, what does this look like? And we thought, well, maybe it's like an art museum, but it's not pretentious. Maybe it's like a science museum, but it's not about facts and figures, that it's really about stoking curiosity in people's minds. And then maybe it's like a stage or a theater, but instead of being, in seats like this and watching someone perform, that you are actually on the stage yourself, and the performers are performing amongst you. And so it's more experiential. And the idea is that it'd be a sort of a pop-up experience where it would move into places that you would least expect it, someplace like an abandoned building, or a business park that is usually like the most soul, destroying place on earth. And then we reset design it, and we take you down a rabbit hole. And there'd be different themes, and some themes could deal with, the stars and galaxies, but other things could be like the really amazing things that are happening in your kitchen cabinet, that maybe if you just look at them in the right way, that maybe you would see something different. And then it's also about the human condition, because I don't know about you, but whenever I've seen a human sacrifice for another human, that is a moment of awe for me. And so the goal is that when you are finished with our little 45-minute experience, that you're reminded of what a gift and what a privilege it is to be alive. And there's something here, a little demo here that you've been probably wondering what's going on over here, and it's something that makes me think about that. It's called a cloud chamber. You can Google cloud chamber, you can make these things. It's not that challenging. It's really just a fish tank that's up here, and then underneath of the fish tank, there's dry ice, so it gets super, super cold underneath, and then we make it a little warm on top. And after a little while, let's see if we go back to the other slide. After a little while, it ends up looking like this. And this is a little layer of cloud. And it's not the cloud that's important, it's the streaks. So do you see these little streaks going through? So those streaks are particles that have come from exploded stars that are flying through this box. And so stars explode, and they send particles all over the place, and some of them make it to Earth, and some of them make it to Australia, and some of them make it to this box. And because of the specific kind of cloud in there, for a fraction of a second, it proves to us that there's an invisible world that's all around us. And it's not just around us, but it's through us, because there's millions of these things flying through you right this second. You have no idea. So our bodies are made of atoms. Atoms that used to be in a star that exploded, and then another star exploded. And another star exploded, and there was all this dust, all these atoms out there, and a bunch of them came together and became big, and then became hot. That became our sun. And then other atoms became the planets. Leftovers became comets and asteroids. Some atoms became the rocks around here, and some of them became the trees. Some of them became your pets. But it is at this moment in galactic history that some of these atoms have become you. Some of the atoms have become me. It is a gift and privilege to be alive. This is what drives the little voice that's inside my head when I wake up. What are you going to do with your brief moment in time? Thank you, guys.
You're amazing. Have a seat. No, keep that going, I'm sorry. Just astonishing. Dan, you had me with the grain of sand, and then you had me all over again with, beep, 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 beep. And we have to ask the critical question of the day. Will the merch be for sale?
I wish. You work for a government institution, and
forget
you can't.
Yeah.
You can go make these and sell them though. So, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, if you look for the travel posters, they're all over the place, and you can buy printed ones, and people sell them. You can buy T-shirts, ties. You can buy a whiskey flask with our posters on them. If you're looking.
You can just print out the posters for free, which is
exactly.
part of what I love about what you've done. You're so intensely creative. As I was saying, you had me with those earlier bits of really engaging people with the beauty and taking a completely different slant on something. Like we're always talking about a grain of sand as, a way of showing how big the universe is. You drilled a hole where you got someone with the world's tiniest drill bit to drill a hole in a grain of sand. But what I absolutely love is the sheer humanity of your work, and especially that was captured, I think, at the end there. I've seen cloud chamber demonstrations in every physics laboratory I've ever been in, but never before has that been used to touch me in that way and make me feel part of something bigger. So thank you for that. And I think one of the things that sets you apart from other artists and other creatives is you're not just curious and creative, but you're fearlessly curious in the way you tackle things, and you're also very brave in the way you give of yourself in that and try different things. Now, was that fearless curiosity, has that just been, it's kind of weird, but in a good way, has that been with you always, or is it something in the way you were brought up, or?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, my dad, he always said, if there's a will, there's a way, you know? And so I took that to heart, and I was like, yeah, we should do this thing. And what I found is that maybe I could imagine an endpoint that was over here, but maybe other people weren't there, you know? And so then there's always this tension, because I'm like already there, and then I need to realize I need to bring them there with me.
So you've got this really strong visual image in your mind, and you've got to kind of relay it to the rest of us to bring you along.
Well, that's in the process of trying to sell a project, getting permission to do it. Yeah.
Does
but
it
I think
always...
once it happens, then people go, oh yeah, I get it now. You know, but they didn't believe it, you know, through the whole process.
So the previous session to this, I don't know if anyone was at the previous session, but it was about education and are we really doing the best for our kids with education? And I just keep, every time I turn the radio on this week, there's been something about teaching creativity, teaching innovation, and there's a big focus on it in our education systems here at the moment. Do you think that creative thinking and creativity can be taught, and do you think it is something we should be focusing on in our schools?
Well, if you're not creative, you're not going to solve problems, right? I mean, right now, I remember being asked.
What problems are you talking about? What are these problems?
Yeah, well, I remember being at an education conference, and I hate this. They were like, what can solve, if you were like with a politician for 2 seconds, how would you solve education? And I'm like, really? And but I said, teaching to the test is not going to win the 21st century, right? How many people do tests when they're out of school, right? It's only when you're in school that you take tests. And so it's really about being flexible, but being able to, when there's a roadblock, that you know how to get around it, and being able to just look at different perspectives of things. And so I don't think that, personally, I believe that creativity is something that is deeply human. And we all have it. It drives me crazy when I hear, and you know, it's very easy for people to say that they're not creative. But I think what they're saying is they're not artistic.
Right.
So there is a difference between being artistic and being able to, you know, put things together in a way that can move people, and that's a different skill set. But we're all creative. You know, there's plenty of creative accountants out there, right? We found that out.
Tragically, yes.
Yeah. And so I think we all have this creativity to think and imagine a future, right? And you know, most animals can't imagine a future that's different than the thing that they're doing at that moment, right? But we can. We can say, I believe in the future we could do this, and then make a plan to get there. Yeah. And so unfortunately, perhaps school, or you know, there's something in the whole process that sort of takes us from being this bright-eyed, you know, little person that's like anything is possible to no, nothing's possible, and you got to answer this test question.
Yeah.
Right, so.
Well, let's hope that there's a few people working. I'm sure there are quite a few people working on the same thing to try and shift away from the test-based approach and really foster creativity in our schools. You know, I have said you've got an ideal job. It's a kind of dream job. I wouldn't be up for pushing you out of it. I'm not quite that skilled, or trying anyway. You've been there 14 years though, so I'm just wondering if you're starting to get itchy feet, and if there is someone else with a very Dan Goodsian sensibility out there who might be wanting to make the leap. Are you thinking of staying, or is there something else you'd like to do?
Well, I never imagined being there that long.
Yeah.
In fact, the way funding works is that they have an end of the fiscal year, and they spend all their money at the end of the fiscal year because they saved it all, and then they don't want to spend anything at the beginning. And I have never bought an object that said JPL or NASA on it, because I was always afraid that I would not have a job in October because that was the end of the fiscal year. because I never wanted to buy it and then all of a sudden get laid off and then walk around with this thing that I.
You know, that kind of imposter syndrome, that's such a chick thing. Hearing that from a white man is really.
Yeah.
It's very
Fortunately,
refreshing.
you know, being able to build a team, but yeah. Well, I mean, one thing about JPL is that it is so big and there are so many ideas going on that it's hard to get bored.
Yeah.
Like there's just always something new and interesting there. There's not many corporate kinds of jobs that I could go to that I would feel the same sort of love for. If the Museum of Awe took off, I could see doing that.
Yeah.
You know, but right now I'm just trying to build an amazing team and something that if I wasn't there, it would continue and be just as strong or stronger. So.